Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It's Thursday, July 27th, 2023. Time for me to say that it's time for another show. So here I go. I'm going ahead and doing so. And, it looks like it's going to be a hot one again. We'll have a spike in heat here in the Virginia corner of the world. It's been actually pretty mild for a little while and looks, according to the forecast for next week, to get mild again. So we're getting a lucky break. Not so lucky elsewhere in the country and elsewhere in the world. We'll keep hearing about all the heat records being shattered and something, but it snowed once a couple of years ago, and a guy had a snowball in his hand. So much for global warming. Okay, well, I don't know whether this summer will wake anybody up. Maybe it will wake people up in certain sectors. I guess astonishing story that I heard the other day, and I see confirmed in some reporting now that I guess the old saying when they used to say it's so hot outside that you could fry an egg on the sidewalk, it turns out to actually be true. Not because people are out there frying eggs, because they're too busy frying themselves, apparently. The story is that, I guess out of Arizona, right? Yeah, here's the CNN story. It's so hot in Arizona. How hot is it? It's so hot in Arizona that doctors are treating a spike of patients who were burned by falling on the ground. I guess, various reasons to fall on the ground in Arizona and elsewhere. One of them, of course, is being overcome by the heat. But if you then collapse on the ground, but you collapse on paved ground, which it has been said to be hot enough to fry an egg, it turns out to be true, and they are frying the people who fall on the pavement rather than the eggs, which are not being dropped on the pavement because they're too expensive. Although they're less expensive than they used to be, the economic reports are good, but that doesn't matter in terms of things getting fried when they fall on hot surfaces. That's the real story. It's so hot in Maricopa County, Arizona, that famous county, that people are being brought into the emergency room with significant, sometimes life-threatening burns. And I believe I had heard that people had actually died. Well, we're not going to have that argument of whether they died with the burns or from the burns. I don't want to open that door. But, people were clearly in trouble with the heat as it was if they got to the point where they collapsed on the ground. But still, it's a fairly serious issue. People are getting second degree plus burns just by falling on the ground. I don't know how long they stay there, but that's what the CNN story says. For the past 3 or 4 weeks of this record heat wave, people have been burned just by falling on the ground. Summers, it says, are our busy season, so we anticipate this sort of thing is going to happen. Really? This thing? But this is really unusual, the number of patients that we're seeing and the severity of the injuries. The acuity of the injuries is much higher, according to Dr. Kevin Foster, Director of Burn Services at the Arizona Burn Center in Valleywise Health. The numbers are higher and the seriousness of injuries are higher, and we don't have a good explanation for it. A pretty good explanation is it's hotter than ever, so more people are collapsing than ever, and the sidewalks and pavement are hotter than ever, and when you collapse and you and hot surface meet, I think that's a pretty good explanation for it, don't you think? I don't know why he puts it that way. Every single one of the 45 beds in the burn center is full, he said, and 1/3 of patients are people who fell and burned themselves on the ground. There are also burned patients in the ICU, and about half those patients are people burned after falls. That does seem like an unusually large number of people. If it's not one thing, it's another. If COVID isn't filling all the hospital beds, it's people being burned by the ground. That seems like a remarkable turn of events. It has definitely taken its toll, Foster said. The area has been hotter than usual, even for Arizona. And that said, experts said, means that the ground can be dangerous for anyone whose bare skin comes in contact with it. That's got to be a bad sign. The earth itself is burning. It doesn't say that it's pavement, but I imagine it's mostly pavement. It does note here that on a hot day, asphalt can easily be 40 to 60 degrees hotter than the air, which is not good for you. Some studies show. Last Thursday, the air temperature reached 119 degrees Fahrenheit, so it was already pretty hot in the air. Phoenix had 6 consecutive days at or above 115 degrees. By Saturday, the streak ended Sunday with a high temperature reaching only 114 degrees. What a break. But the temperature of asphalt and pavement and concrete and sidewalks in Arizona on a warm, sunny day or summer afternoon is 180 degrees sometimes. I mean, it's just a little below boiling, so it's really something, Foster said. So, yeah, it can take only a fraction of a second to get a pretty deep burn, he said. So, yeah, watch out. And I guess that's probably happening, not even with people falling, but I suppose if you decide to cool off at the pool and you run around on a hot pool deck without shoes or flip-flops on, I guess the water evaporates off the bottom of your feet pretty quickly too. And well, you obviously know it, and it's no surprise to people who spent any time outside like that during the summer. Yeah, it gets pretty hot, so you can imagine what happens if you collapse on the sidewalk and aren't capable of moving yourself. And if you're doing so when you're not fresh out of the pool, yep, you can burn yourself pretty quick. That's really remarkable. We're in a bit of trouble. So between that and crazy forest fires and wildfires that are also presenting new challenges, apparently fires that burn so hot that the smoke makes it impossible for the firefighters to get close enough to actually put the thing out. You know, it's not good. We should sort of cool things off if we can. All right, Greg Dworkin joins us. Maybe you've heard a little bit about this phenomenon. I don't know if it's happening in Connecticut. Thankfully, it's not that hot there.
We've heard about the phenomenon in Phoenix. I mean, hot enough for you and all that. But so. How is it that all these people are falling? Well, if you have El Cheapo flip-flops and you're not wearing huaraches or something decent, they melt right onto the concrete and stick. And so, sure, you pick up your feet and it doesn't move, and next thing you know, you're on the ground, and oh my gosh, you're in the burn unit.
Wow. So, yeah, like I guess you don't want to walk across a hot griddle any more than you would again the sidewalk.
Yeah, I mean, sure, you don't want to walk across a hot griddle barefoot, but you also don't want to walk performers with shoes that are going to melt and stick.
Yeah. That's, I mean, I hadn't thought about it. I guess I was thinking, oh, well, it's hot and people are getting overcome by the heat and collapsing. Yeah. But if your shoes melt and stick to the ground, well, okay, that'll trip you up. But, yeah, that's a thing. And in our hotter climes, flip-flops are a preferred footwear, which I always wondered about.
Yeah, that doesn't work at 180-degree temperature all the time.
I also
if
thought
you have good material, sure.
But generally
if you're moving,
speaking,
sure. If you're just standing there for a while talking to somebody, and then
well, stop doing that or get better shoes. I've always marveled at that.
Don't be outside. Phoenix was averaging 100 degrees for a month.
That's not great, no matter what your footwear choice.
Yeah. So pay attention. I'll tell you what is great.
Fallen arches and diabetes.
Dow Jones was averaging on the upside for 13 days in a row. It's first time in years and years and years.
Well, it's
and
hot
there's a U.S.
market.
Economy statement this morning, unexpectedly picking up in the second quarter. It expanded at a 2.4 annual rate, stronger pace of growth than economists anticipated. So Doc Brandon continues to rise. Of interest, Yale business guru gushes to MSNBC Bidenomics' most successful intervention since FDR's New Deal, he says.
Oh, okay.
He was talking to Lawrence O'Donnell about it.
Well,
across the board, we're seeing results, and in fact, we are seeing results. Yes, housing costs are still too high, but non-housing, everything else for business activity is really picking up. Things take time. Consumer sentiment is rising. That part is actually pretty good. We talked, I think, yesterday about the fact that there's a lot of different things working in Biden's favor. In fact, things working in Biden's favor have gotten to the point where there's an article about how Republicans, and this is in the Messenger, one of the new media sites.
All right.
Republicans reframed 2024 as a race versus Harris.
Oh,
Not
all right.
Biden. GOP White House hopefuls are warning a vote for the 80-year-old president would be a vote for his unpopular running mate. If you can't beat Biden, go after the black lady.
I guess so, although she's winning too because she just kicked their butts on Ron DeSantis' unforced slavery error.
Well, look, I mean, they have nothing.
Yeah, well.
They're going to lose.
I certainly hope so if there's any sense in the world. But some people wear shoes that melt. So
this is what you do when you know what you're doing isn't working. Speaking of what you're doing isn't working, I saw a tweet from the Florida Reporter.
It's an X now.
It's the Triborough Bridge, buddy.
Okay.
Especially now. I'm not calling it the RFK Bridge. That's stupid. It's the Triborough and it's the Bronx Zoo. I don't care if you try to rename it.
All right. Well, it's national.
In any case, Peter Sorch wrote that I woke up this morning wondering, and I'm paraphrasing because I don't have it right in front of me, which light socket Ron DeSantis is going to stick his finger in. He's a Florida journalist following the campaign.
Okay.
Said, I can't believe all the stuff he did between RFK and slavery. And what's he going to do now?
I don't know.
He said a dumpster fire doesn't begin to describe what's going on there.
Yeah, they really are going bananas. And I guess for fear of using the phrase again too much, doubling down on things, I did see Christina Pushaw, first of all, is alive and still working for him and still making things worse. What was it? Who was it? Byron Donald, I think.
Yes, Byron Donalds.
He said the normal-ish thing. He is walking a fine line here, being both Republican and a black elected official, but willing to say, well, look, I think they're doing the right thing overall with education in Florida, which is an amazing, error to make. But then said, but this slavery thing, like the idea that there was personal benefit, that was wrong, and they should certainly get rid of that. And Pushaw and the team came out to say, oh, what a liberal loser he is. He's one of these vampire pedophiles now, I guess. He's totally wrong, and everybody knows it. Slavery was awesome. I can't believe a black guy doesn't see that. I don't know.
That's not all he said.
No.
They also said, and he's just like Kamala Harris.
Yes, right. That would actually be the key point. I mean, they're really throwing him overboard.
What does that mean?
But I don't know. It means.
What about him and Kamala Harris are similar features? They're not the same party. They're not the same sex. They don't have the same political philosophy. What is about him that could possibly be similar?
Both have had shoes melt recently, possibly. I don't know.
If they've been in Phoenix, sure.
Can't think what it might be.
Oh, Florida's hot too. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah. Well,
but not like Phoenix.
All right.
In Florida, it's not a dry heat,
Oh, right. That's true. So there's a little layer of humidity that keeps your shoes from melting.
Well, it just boils on your skin, I suppose. So, yeah, I mean, they're just terrible. So let's talk a little bit about things that don't matter quickly.
Oh.
And then we'll talk about things that do.
All right.
Things that don't matter. Yesterday, there was a UFO hearing.
Yes.
You mentioned it.
Yeah.
What you perhaps didn't mention is the guy doing the prime testimony, the star witness, suggested UFOs come from another dimension and were covered up by Mussolini and the Vatican.
That's a good theory.
He also suggested the government is in possession of non-human bodies and just keeping it to the public. And you look at that and you ask yourself, why are we having this hearing?
Trump.
Why do we have to treat this guy seriously?
That's they love, they'll take anybody, I guess. It is a real exercise. And if we put them in a suit and tie, can they just say anything and we get away with it? But this isn't getting away with it. People found out. They're really, okay, that's what they're spending congressional time on.
Right. Here's another thing that doesn't matter.
Like there could
as
be
per
UFOs,
Larry
but
Sabato, the doppelganger for the My Pillow guy, tweeted this
That's
morning.
True. Yes.
A bit of history. Hunter Biden will have the same effect on the 2024 election results as Billy Carter had on the 1980 results, which is to say next to none.
Yeah.
And as a refresher, Larry reminds us that Billy Carter wasn't just about Billy Beer.
Oh.
Billy Carter took a loan of $200,000 to $2 million from Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi at the time.
Yeah, that's right.
whose name is spelled any way you wish because there's like 19 different spellings for it. Months of bad headlines, congressional investigations, none of it mattered. Partisans love this stuff, but it's not why or how people vote for the president of the United States. They vote based on the economy expanding is what they do.
Probably true. If there's a problem like
mainstream networks and papers made a big deal of Billy in Libya. Coverage was highly critical, sustained, great copy.
Did I? Oh, here. I think I hear you now.
I don't know.
Okay, I do hear you. Okay, so you were saying Billy took the loan. There was...
Yeah, and it was like majorly covered, and it didn't make any difference.
I mean,
of course, he did have Billy Beer.
That was
And Larry reminds us, Billy Beer is a cautionary tale. The brewery went belly up. I have an unopened six-pack somewhere in my lifetime collection of political junk.
I don't know if
it's best unopened. Don't open it. It's all skunked up.
Well,
now.
It was no kind of time to be experiment. I mean, it's not like it is today with microbrews. Like one of them might be good. You never know. They might have a weird formula. Everything was pretty much the same. So it was lousy beer from the 70s, 80s packaged as. I mean, that's a funny idea.
I sent you a picture of it though, and the fun thing is when you actually look at the can.
Yeah.
At the top of the can, it reads.
Look at your can.
Made expressly for. What's that?
Yeah. I'm just making jokes about looking at cans, which is not.
Yeah.
What?
Made expressly for and with the personal approval of America's all-time great beer drinkers, Billy Carter.
All right.
And then at the bottom is personal message.
Look at that.
I had this beer brewed up just for me. I think it's the best I've ever had, and I've tasted a lot. I think you'll like it too. And then his signature, Billy Carter. So it's a great political thing. It has absolutely, positively nothing to do with anything. In other words, it's a guy trying to make money off of a famous name. They do that. Not unusual.
Right.
Doesn't usually work in terms of trying to tie it to the other family member who's actually a political figure. Been around a long time.
Yeah.
And the partisans jump on it. It never works. That's his point.
Yeah. Also not going to be super effective to be like, he's from the South and he's a good old boy and he likes beer. How terrible. It wasn't really a huge winner, but look at the pull tab.
How's that going to play in Arkansas? Let me ask you.
Yeah, it's a collector's item just from the pull tab that it's got pre-pop top thingies that they have now. Or nowadays, 50 years already. I don't know, but that's a classic looking can there. I guess
things that are not serious. Ron DeSantis.
All right.
Ron DeSantis said he would not choose RFK Jr. as a running mate.
Well, I didn't think that was going to happen, but all right.
But he would consider him to be in charge of the FDA or CDC.
Sure, why not?
That's after the slavery thing. That's after, everything else.
Yeah.
So not ready for prime time. Now, to be a little more serious about this, the whole Bunter's the butler in in the great British series, but with Peter Wimsey. The part about the Hunter Biden plea deal is extremely confusing. And
so they said.
There's a lovely newsletter that Joyce Vance put out this morning, which really tries to explain everything. She titled it I'm Being Wrong because she figured, like everybody else, Hunter Biden would go to court, it would be boring, and that would be the end of it. She wrote, tomorrow is merely a formality, turned out to be anything but.
Okay.
And she talks about what usually happens in plea deals, which is not what happened here, and then tries to break down why it was so complicated. And I found it, as a non-lawyer, very useful.
All right.
First of all, plea deals usually break down in a very predictable way. The defense and the prosecution set up a plea deal. You go to court. Part of the deal is that you essentially have a list of things that you did wrong that you have to attest to in front of your family and friends.
Yeah.
And the perpetrator generally balks and says, I don't want to read this in front of my family. I did this, and this. You want me to read this in front of my wife and say, I can't do it. So the judge calls a recess, and the defense lawyer takes the perp aside and says, look, you got to do this, and convinces them. And then they go and they do it. That's typically what happens in a plea deal if it doesn't go smoothly. And that's not what happened here.
All right.
there were two confusing issues, one more complicated than the other, because there were two things that he was being accused of that he was going to do a plea deal on.
Yeah, pretty different things.
One was taxes, the other was guns.
Right, both inevitable.
Well, so he was addicted to drugs. While addicted to drugs, on the one hand, he didn't pay his taxes.
That I can understand how that might happen.
Right, and addicted people on drugs with guns is like a bad thing, and so those are the two issues. So the first of the two issues...
Republicans are really concerned about gun control all of a sudden.
Exactly. Where came down to a basic difference, she writes, in the understanding of what benefits the agreement gave Hunter Biden.
All right.
Hunter Biden didn't pay his taxes, but at the time he was working for and getting money from, among other things, a foreign country. The details show he wasn't doing a lot of work and was capitalizing on his name Billy Carter style. Terrible, but no political big deal, except for Republicans who can't run against Biden, so they want to run against either Kamala Harris or Hunter Biden or both. So in the process of looking at this, the government said, look, pay your taxes, do your stuff, we won't prosecute you. Mm-hmm. And the defense, Hunter Biden's defense, looked at that and said, cool. That sort of means like you won't prosecute us for anything at all related to this whole tax thing, right? And the government said, well, we didn't exactly say that.
Wow.
And the defense said, what do you mean? And this was all at the trial, which is why the judge was pissed. You're supposed to settle this stuff beforehand.
Yeah, read this. No.
And the judge says, well, wait a minute. So there are parts of this that are sort of complicated. If he was working for a foreign government, is he still subject to further investigation under the Foreign Agent Registration Act, FARA?
Yeah.
And the government said, yeah, well, maybe.
Oh.
And so
but just not the tax thing.
The judge says, so you're saying that, like, you won't prosecute him for that? And then Fed said, we're not saying that. And the defense said, I thought you said that. And the judge said, this is ridiculous. You got to settle this. You got 2 weeks. I'm not doing this until it's really crystal clear what you're talking about. She was smart. She was good.
All right.
Okay. So that's issue number one, because maybe there is a FARA charge. Maybe there isn't. But typically what happens is that if there's a FARA charge, again, I'm not a lawyer, I'm just reading the experts, is that like Mike Flynn or Paul Manafort, the government says, you know what, you're a foreign agent. You better register as a foreign agent.
Right.
So they register you as a foreign agent, and then they book you.
Yeah. All right.
Nobody asked Hunter Biden to register as a foreign agent. So I'm not clear as to how big a deal that is. Republicans will make the most of it, but there's no there.
All right.
So that's one of those things that you step back and say, okay, well, probably the Fed screwed up because it wasn't crystal clear with the defense what was going on here. And the judge said, go fix it, and they will, and then there'll be a plea agreement.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what happened on that aspect. And that seems to be fairly straightforward, awkward, embarrassing, but
Okay.
Then there's the second thing. Okay. And that's related and involves the interplay between the plea agreement on the tax issue and the pretrial diversion agreement on the gun charge, a drug user in possession of a firearm.
Right.
If Biden fulfills the terms of the agreement, whose terms include seeking employment and avoiding drug and alcohol use for 2 years, the charges against them are dismissed, and it's as though they were never filed. They won't be part of his permanent record, although everybody knows about it, so that doesn't really matter.
Right. Yeah, but it would save ink.
The problem is, according to the agreement as filed, it's the judge who's supposed to supervise that.
Okay.
And she said, that's not my constitutional role.
Okay.
This is a strictly law thing that has nothing to do with politics. Under the Constitution, Joyce Vance writes, decisions about whom to indict and on what charges are reserved to the executive and put in the hands of the Justice Department. Judges don't make those decisions. The judge was concerned that because the agreement gave her the authority to oversee decisions about when a breach of the agreement occurred, she's being forced out of her constitutional lane. That's why she objected.
Okay. That's
interesting and, okay, notable. and has nothing to do with corruption and has nothing to do with undue influence.
Yeah.
So that's what happened yesterday. And you read that and say, okay, well, that all makes sense. They'll probably work it out, and then they'll be back in 2 weeks. End of discussion. The Republicans will make everything they possibly can out of it, even claiming that this means that they are totally justified in trying to impeach Biden or at least launch an impeachment inquiry. Sure. So I thought our listeners might like to know what really happened and what's going on so that, when you hear these charges, sometimes if you don't know, deep down there's I wonder if there's something there. There's nothing there.
Yeah, that's not very convincing. At least half of it. The second half of it is really just, it's not unusual for them to go back to the same judge and say he was supposed to do this, diversion program and he didn't, and now I need you to sentence him instead. But yeah, I guess the agreement is really written such that, well, you monitor it, and if you see a problem, you can come and call me.
She didn't like that.
But I'm not going to be the one to monitor it. That
right.
Doesn't make
and
any
so,
sense.
so Joyce Vance writes, why were such unusual provisions used in such a high-profile case? Why is this happening, as Rachel Maddow might say, or in the words of the judge, why can't you do this the normal way?
Yeah,
So
I wonder what the
off.
thinking was. I mean, maybe they were trying to just to avoid having a DOJ role in it while Joe Biden is president and saying we just shifted this to an entirely different and independent branch and let the judiciary monitor rather than Joe Biden's Department of Justice. And maybe they thought they were avoiding problems that way.
Well, they were worried about Biden being scapegoated by Trump. Yeah. And the judge said, you guys didn't do anything wrong. I'm just not comfortable with this. Go back and work out the language.
All right. So at least half of it is, there's no problem with it. Just do this differently.
Yes.
Okay. Well, and then the other half is just, he might have to register as an agent or then ask him to. Okay. We will if we think that's necessary. That's it?
Yeah. That's it.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
When I was in college.
Oh, you can tell everybody now. Well, we're coming back. Right. Welcome back, everybody. When Greg was in college.
When I was in college, I
happened.
remember wearing homemade bootstrapped sandals where the soles were used tires.
Ah, yeah, that's good recycling. Reusing.
Yeah,
right?
I don't know how they do on 180-degree pavement, though.
Yeah, I mean, they're made for pavement, but I guess
they're made for pavement, so maybe it's okay. And I think maybe they don't melt as opposed to like the El Cheapo rubber ones.
Maybe, yeah, I don't know. I mean, tires can melt
or plastic
at
ones.
Super hot temperatures or whatever. And, in the car
but you know
racing,
what? I don't want to find
you
out.
have that problem. Yeah, well, wear something sturdy and protective. And I know that's not the style or the preference in the South. I don't know why that's the case, but
The internet is fading in and out today.
Melting.
I don't know why.
Probably melting. All right, we're on
so
now.
Let's have things that may
going.
matter and then things that actually do matter.
Okay.
Here's a may matter. I'm not sure if it matters or not. You tell me. Mitch McConnell says he's fine after freezing mid-press conference.
If he can say it, then it's better than it was yesterday.
This is the Daily Beast. He was giving a press conference and he stopped and stood there motionless, then was walked away by aides. And then an aide said, well, he felt lightheaded and stepped away for a moment, adding McConnell later returned to speak to reporters. Turns out further reporting says that McConnell isn't always comfortable walking long distances and sometimes uses a wheelchair in crowded situations. I don't know if you're aware of that.
No, Not the wheelchair thing.
Is McConnell too old?
Are
Republicans asking him to step down?
Well, maybe privately, but no.
No.
Not in public. He's, 81, I think I read. That's concerning whenever anybody freezes mid-sentence. I mean, besides me, I freeze mid-sentence all the time, but you get a different, there's a different suspicion attached to it. When you're 81, you've recently had another bad fall. There was the fall in his patio. There was the fall in, I don't remember where it was, this last one. But, yeah, he's reaching that age where that will be very concerning.
He's reaching the age where you have to stay out of Phoenix.
Yes, that's true, too. I mean, if he falls in Phoenix, he's finished.
In that follow-up session, McConnell was asked about his health and reportedly said he's fine.
Yeah.
He was asked if he's fully able to do his job. He said yes.
That's young as a senator goes.
The president called to check up on me, and I told him I got sandbagged.
Oh.
He simply added he was fine, despite reporters asking for more information about his health and whether he's seen a doctor for it.
Okay.
I don't know what that means.
He's almost assuredly seeing a doctor for a number of things. And,
I'm sure he has health insurance.
That's fine. And okay. Yeah, that's a may matter just in terms of he could find that he's
if he's fine, nothing.
He decides
and if he has further
leave.
episodes, it may matter.
Right. So, the question, I guess, really where it would matter would be, who steps into his role as minority leader in the Senate? And it doesn't matter a great deal, but
John Thune would.
Yeah. Thune, Cornyn could, I suppose.
I think Cornyn's stepping back a little.
Yeah.
It'll be John Thune. And then
that's who escorted
you might
him
ask
away,
the question,
too.
what happens if McConnell actually has to step down because of health reasons?
Yeah.
And it turns out a funny thing happened in the state of Kentucky.
Oh.
I think it used to be that the governor would simply appoint a replacement.
All right.
But the governor's a Democrat.
Ooh, that is a
And
funny
because
thing.
the governor's a Democrat and people thought about this, they passed a law just a couple of years ago that said, no, we have a new way of doing it now.
Just
the same
always.
party
Yeah.
will have three of their choices sent to the governor, and he'll choose between the choices. So it'll be one of three Republicans that the party will decide on. And so that way you don't have such things as Democrats in the governor's seat appointing a Democrat and changing the balance in the Senate.
Yeah.
I don't have a really huge problem with that. I mean, it does seem kind of arbitrary.
Yeah, I see what you mean. I agree.
I mean, to literally flip the Senate based on the fact that somebody in the opposite party wants to play hardball.
Yeah, well,
it's okay. I guess people do play hardball.
Yes,
but I'm okay with not playing hardball sometimes.
Well, I would say, I mean, the only thing that upsets me about that is that, it's always our job to not play hardball for some reason. Oh, that's bad for the country. It is. It's true, but
yeah, look, I'm a Democrat. I'm all right being fair on this.
Yeah, I understand. It does make it bothers people that, hey, we elected a Republican to the Senate and now we have a Democrat instead. That doesn't feel right. Although you did elect the Democrat, and that was the job he was given, but then again, that job was stripped from him. But then again, we always see that every time. Every time a Democrat wins a governor's race where there's a Republican legislature, they immediately move to strip them of powers that they're glad that the governor has.
Yeah, I mean, I would have been okay if they left it. I'm okay that they changed it.
Yeah.
Arguments can be made either way. But that's the way it is. So
I guess one question
may
is
matter,
what
may
happens
not
if you
matter.
don't
If he's
pick
not
from
leaving,
the
it
three?
doesn't make any difference.
Suppose they hand him a list of three and he says, I don't care what your list says. Who enforces that? No, there's the hardball game to play. Okay, nice list.
What are you going to do? Take me to...
I mean, who signs the certificate that says this is the guy who's supposed to sit? I do. You say I didn't sign it right?
And if the Supreme Court tells me I have to do it some other way, I'll just do it the Alabama way and ignore it.
Yeah, right. Well, let's make it last. I'll tell you what, we'll keep the seat vacant until we fix this misunderstanding you and I have. And if that's 2 years,
right.
4 years.
I just won't appoint anybody. I don't like any of the three. I'm not appointing anybody. What are you going to do?
Yeah, you know what happens is the governor says, you know who I think we should appoint to Mitch McConnell's seat? Merrick Garland. What do you think? Can we get a hearing about this? No, we can't. All right, we'll keep the seat vacant for a year or two. We can't have a thing like this happening in an election year. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
All right.
Anyway,
Some idea.
So you mentioned on the show yesterday, Rudy Giuliani. We talked about him a little bit.
Right. We should point him
Conceding
to
he
jail.
made a false statement about Georgia election workers after the fact. He said, it was only for legal reasons that I said that. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
And, of course, it
Hunter
does.
Biden, too.
But that was yesterday's discussion. What I found interesting is this piece in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution today by Greg Bluestein. Republicans behind Giuliani's Georgia election hearings are mum on his false statements. First of all, the headline is clearly he made false statements.
Yes, he did do
Secondly, they don't know what to do with it.
that. All right.
Over the course of 3 legislative hearings at the Georgia Capitol, Donald Trump attorney Rudy Giuliani promoted falsehoods and conspiracy theories about the state's election at the behest of key Republican leaders. Facing a defamation lawsuit, Giuliani filed a motion this week saying he was no longer contesting accusations that he made false statements about Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss. Ruby Freeman, I couldn't remember her last name.
Yes.
And Shay Moss, 2 Fulton County workers he wrongly accused of committing voter fraud. And the GOP lawmakers who welcomed him have so far declined to comment, and then he names local names. And again, it's a reminder we're focusing on what will be the big, huge story if the D.C. grand jury meets today and indicts
They
Trump.
are meeting today.
They are meeting, and we'll see what they do.
Yes, I saw reports that said they were the jurors were already showing up at the courthouse unexpectedly early.
So
no one knows what that means.
Question on the table is, what's going on in Georgia? Because all this Giuliani stuff is all part and parcel of the same thing.
Yes.
And, again, a reminder, Trump's in big legal trouble.
Yes.
And yes, things work slowly, way too slowly for anybody's comfort, but they're happening.
Yeah. Well, that's good news. I find that interesting.
And that does
too.
matter. That's one of those things that matters.
I think so. It's interesting. You can compare it to something that doesn't matter a great deal, but just while they're saying, well,
big legal action. And what I was happy to see today is I was listening to both cable news, NPR on radio, and some of the other things. They covered Giuliani first.
Okay.
And they covered Hunter Biden third or fourth. After
that
the
makes
weather
sense.
and some other important things.
Here's a thing that is happening but doesn't matter as much as the thing we brought you first. Okay.
Yes. So I was happy to hear that. So maybe
Good.
they are learning.
All right. Well, yeah. I guess it's not great to get too excited too early, but if we had a good day, we had a good day.
Celebrate the small things.
Right. All right. Here I go.
All right, here's something that may
Yay.
matter.
Small thing.
Janet Yellen. Every time I read that, I think, Boris Yeltsin, is he still? No, it's Janet
What's she
Yellen.
yelling about now?
Picks a new Treasury climate czar.
Treasury climate czar. Yeah,
Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen's next climate advisor will be Ethan Zindler, who most recently served as head of America at Bloomberg, NEF.
Wow.
Will become the department's new climate counselor. A well-known figure in the clean energy sector, could play a key role in the department's ongoing efforts to confront the financial risks of a warming world. It's just nice to have a professional group. That is to say, professional people in the White House,
a real
professional politicians, real, actual government, serious people.
Yeah.
Do things that may actually, in the long run, help.
It is a good idea. It will no doubt be criticized anyway. Why do they need a climate person? Just tell me how much money we have. Come on. Yeah, right. Republicans will hate it.
Yeah, I mean, this is the classic, food is terrible in such small portions.
Yeah, I guess
the guy is used. Yeah, this is a useless gesture, and why didn't they do it last year?
Yeah, right. Well, it's getting very hot.
Well, which is it? Is it a useless gesture, or should they have done it last year? Come on, guys, pick.
It's a serious thing.
Wait, it doesn't matter. We just want to criticize.
Yeah,
and that's our side.
It's very hot. We use paper money. That's a problem. Could catch on fire. We need
it's even worse if you use metal money. You want to hold 180-degree metal?
Actually, it probably would be harder because you got to get to 451 degrees before it's an issue for the paper.
Yeah.
Hot coins, that could be an issue. How hot does Bitcoin get? I don't know, but it generates heat. That's bad. So, yeah.
I'm still suspicious, by the way, that the whole reason Elon Musk bought Twitter is so he could make it a Bitcoin thing.
No. Well,
he tried with the Dogecoin and putting the little dog up in the corner and stuff like that. That was early on. So I think it's part of a Ponzi scheme, but we'll see.
Yeah, no one knows exactly what it is, but there is now that he's changed the name, or says he changed the name. They changed something, but none of the stuff that really matters. We're just calling it X. But if you go to twitter.com, you still get Twitter.
You can't change the website so easily.
Yeah, they can't change anything.
You can port it over to a different website, but
right? No,
it's complicated and that costs money. He doesn't want to spend any money.
Right, but apparently he's had a thing about branding things as X for a long time. It's very problematic for trademark reasons, etc. But that's been a long time.
Ex-wife, he's really into it.
He does, and he wants to build some sort of weird super company that merges all the things that I was good at for a while.
Using a trademark that is copyrighted by Microsoft, which is the X. You mean that kind of thing?
Yeah. Well, that's this big problem with it, and I guess it's another way for him to lose a bunch of money.
It's probably not close enough to really matter, but.
Well, I think that they had registered it for use in social media.
Waldman explaining to me the difference between copyright and trademark. So.
True, right? Well,
try to remember that lesson.
See if you can recall that. But the trademark issue was.
This is a trademark.
Yes, and he didn't check to see, does anybody own the trademark for X? And you might think no one can trademark X. We can't copyright X, but you can trademark. Certainly a logo and a description.
But now the Microsoft logo is a little different, so it's probably okay. But, it's just one of those things people were pointing out.
Yeah, I mean, the logos are different, but I mean, if it's just an X, and I think it's registered for use in online community and social media. So he's really running into a brick wall.
Sesame Street was actually on Twitter giving him a hard time about it.
And they're right. But Microsoft, of course, will actually make a problem for them, and they have lots of money to do it with, and they may just settle for a payment.
Okay, down at the list that I sent you, way at the bottom, I think it's the last one, is 538, and their latest polls on the presidential election for 2024.
Which don't mean anything.
Don't mean anything. That's not why I'm bringing it up. I just want to point out some stuff here, which I think is worth discussing.
All right.
So if you go to that page and look at latest polls.
Click on 538. All right. I'll do it.
Right. Okay. And you see the first set of polls is from a group called Premise. It's a garbage poll. They're using cell phones. They find in some of their models, Biden's up by 5, and in some of their models, Trump is up by 8.
Those, what kind of phones are those?
They're supposedly smartphones, but I think they're stupid phones.
I guess so. Stupid owners.
So, who is Premise and why are they doing this? On their website, they say the results are based on responses from 1,577 Americans collected between July 21st and 26th via the Premise smartphone application.
I think they should free those Americans they collected.
Who used to say Premise smartphone application? Premise used stratified sampling of its opt-in panel members along with post-stratification weighting.
Uh-huh.
And they're weighted by age, gender, region, and education. Right. And if you believe them, great. But my point is they have a bunch of data points there. Then they have YouGov, which is a known poll run by The Economist, Biden plus 4. Let's look at registered voters for the moment. Then they have Mark Penn's outlet, Harris X, which is there to confound people and do stupid stuff. And they have Trump up by 4. Then the next set is from McLaughlin and Associates, which is Trump's pollster.
Oh.
And they have Trump up by 2, and they have likely voters. And how the hell do you know what a likely voter is at this particular point in time? Then there's Morning Consult, which has Biden up by 5, and then a bunch of Harris X polls.
All right.
Showing that both Trump and DeSantis are winning slightly. And my point is, of the 20-some-odd polls here, YouGov and Morning Consult, which aren't A-rated polls to begin with, but, are legitimate, accepted polls, both have Biden up by 4 or 5. All the others have Trump up, and they're either Harris X, McLaughlin, Trump's pollster, or this outlet premise. My point is that just like last time, you're going to see the polling averages flooded by a bunch of garbage polls whose job it is to try to weight the averages in Trump's favor. Don't fall for it.
Okay. That's a
right, don't cherry pick polls, but just look at it and say, okay, all right, I see what's going on here.
Yeah.
Leave it at that.
I mean,
and then wait for more legitimate polling to come in and see.
You don't have to cherry pick polls. You just say, I'm only using polls, as opposed to these things, which are not really polls, apparently.
Well, it's hard. It's a slippery slope, as they like to say.
Sure.
You don't want to say, okay, but I'm not using Harris, I'm not using Rasmussen, I'm not using Premise, I'm not using McLaughlin. Then what are you left with? Well, there aren't any polls. Oh, well, that tells you something right there.
Yeah, remember when
you just eliminated 16 out of the 20 poll. Well, that tells you something right there.
Yeah. Exactly. First of all, we were instructed right at the outset, they don't matter at this point. So who would be doing polling? Not a lot of people, except for people who are interested in screwing things up.
Especially LV polling.
Oh.
You don't even know who the nominees are, and you're doing likely voter. How the hell do you know who a likely voter is?
Right. Okay. Yeah, but it's a good exploit. I mean, we know that people are going to feel bad about simply throwing out polls in a way that looks like it, or you could be accused of doing it in an arbitrary fashion. Well, you're only discounting them because they show Trump won. Well, I'm discounting them because Trump isn't winning, and these polls say things that are ridiculous. And I guess anybody can say, sure, I conducted a poll. My guy's winning by 100%. Put that in your average.
So I mentioned that Janet Yellen was appointing a new environmental czar to look at stuff. And along those lines, speaking of the environment, I want to include this piece from the Alaska Beacon. And this, of course, would be very close to Mary Peltola's heart because she's pro-fish.
Right.
And by the way, Alaska is one of those states that's just near and dear to my heart, like Iceland.
Oh.
Like Iceland, it's a foreign place where they speak English.
Yes, true. That's a good comparison.
And the landscapes are very similar. And as sort of, exotic. And having been there, it's like awesome.
Okay.
And the people are wonderful. And here, Alaska leaders petitioned the U.S. Supreme Court for reversal of the EPA ban on the Pebble Mine, which is in Bristol Bay, which is sockeye salmon country.
Yes, the fish.
It's out in the middle of nowhere. And Alaska says the only way to make money in that environment, in the remote area, is to mine. Because you can't do anything else because it's too remote to make stuff and then ship it there or ship stuff there to be made. It doesn't work. Mining, on the other hand, that we can do. So let's do an open pit mine and throw all the garbage in the bay where the sockeye salmon grow.
Yeah.
What could go wrong? And the EPA said, you can't do that. We're banning it. And Alaska leaders today petitioned the U.S. Supreme Court for a reversal of this ban. They're skipping the lower courts.
Oh, wow.
In an attempt to overturn a decision barring permitting of the controversial copper and gold mine. Now, I was in Alaska years ago, and the Pebble Mine was a big deal then. Yes. So this is something that they've been fighting for 10 years.
Yeah.
And the EPA made a decision, and appealing directly to the Supreme Court, according to this piece, while bypassing all lower courts is an unusual step, but it's warranted, quote, given the extraordinary decision, Alaska Attorney General Treg Taylor said in a statement released by the State Department of Law. If the EPA can rely on undefined terms and subjective standards instead of sound science to bypass the regular state and federal permitting processes here, it can do it anywhere from large mining projects such as this down to a family building their dream house. It's indefensible, and it's an unprecedented power grab that the U.S. Supreme Court should find unlawful. And normally, you'd look at this and say, well, that's garbage, but it's the Supreme Court, so God knows.
Yeah, I mean, they have something they could stop.
John Roberts hates federal agencies.
He does, but a lot of those Republican justices enjoy fly fishing and expensive vacations. And if one of them that they can no longer take at some billionaire's expense is fishing in Bristol Bay, then maybe that will get them upset. Maybe their hobby will get in the way of this agenda.
So I like that. The best way to settle unsettled law is to invite Clarence Thomas to vacation there with no fees attached.
Right. And then now there's two possibilities. One, I liked this a lot, and so therefore I'm going to side with the EPA, unusually. Or, well, I've done that, checked it off my bucket list, to hell with everyone else in the world. You can fill it up with lava.
There's a third way you could look at it. Say, this is really interesting. It looks like a good opportunity. I wonder if my rich friends will buy it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Right. That's a possibility. Just buy Bristol Bay. And then, I don't know what. Do they fish there?
No, they want to mine there.
Or do they mine there? Yeah, I guess. I mean, they may buy the mine and not the bay.
I'll decide. And, you know, what could be a conflict of interest? I'm Clarence Thomas.
I don't know. I find the whole premise interesting,
don't exist.
Too. Like that the Alaskans are saying, well, the problem with Bristol Bay is there's no way to make money here. I mean, there is fish and sell the fish, and that's what people are doing.
The problem with Bristol Bay is there's fish in it.
Yeah,
in our
right.
way.
But the gold sells for more than the fish, so shouldn't we do that? What an interesting idea. Like, well, I mean, you can't make money here. You can't make money on the moon either. Should we sue about that? I don't know. But what about maybe you don't need to make money out of every square foot of Alaska. There are a lot of them.
Well, this is a Christian nation. We have a God-given constitutional right to kill these fish.
Right. If they're worth more dead than alive, or the gold is worth enough that we don't care whether the fish live. But
right.
All right. Well, I mean, that's wrong and upside down to start with, but it may just turn out
there's
that
no
the fishermen
fish
win.
in Bristol Bay anymore. You can't say it's from the slag and all the other waste products from the open mine. Maybe they just got bored and left.
Right. They moved. They voted with their fins and left. All right. Well, I mean, lots of Alaskans of all stripes are actually against that because they like the fish and want to be able to eat that. And as enticing as gold is, I think probably that most Alaskans know pretty well. They got a sweetheart deal on the oil, and they all got a piece of the oil profits, but I don't think anybody's going to be offering them any. That's the way to campaign against it. You know, you're not going to get any of the profits from this gold or anything, right? It's not like the oil.
Yeah.
Well, then we'll take the fish. Maybe that's enough.
And my final segment here for this week and for today are a couple of pieces by Phillips O'Brien looking at Ukraine.
Oh.
This one was in Foreign Affairs a year ago, The War That Defied Expectations, What Ukraine Revealed About Military Power. And he follows up with that, so that's why I wanted to start with this one.
All right.
And he makes the point that part of the problem with people's expectations is they don't really understand war.
Oh.
Right? Everybody thinks modern war is the 6-day war.
Oh,
that it's over in 3 or 4 days, and if it didn't, it's somehow a failure. They don't even remember, he writes, what actually happened with the Gulf War, with Desert Storm.
Okay. Because, I mean, it seems like that would be a hard sell here in the United States in our 25th year in, Iraq and Afghanistan or whatever.
Right. And people don't remember, but when George H.W. Bush said, "This shall not stand," it took something like 8 months. It took a long time, relative long time. Yeah. It wasn't 6 days.
Right. I mean, it took a long time to get it ready. What you had to do is, first the U.S. had to knock out all of Iraq's anti-aircraft capability. Right.
Then they could fly the skies with impunity. Then they could do things, like use their tank killing helicopters and such. And that's complicated. And the ability to do that is something the U.S. has. And everybody assumed Russia was semi-equal or almost equal and so on and so forth. Turns out, not at all.
All right.
Right. And so, the expectation for a fast war is part of the deal.
I see.
And it turns out Russia can't do anything like that. And what Ukraine is doing is completely different than what people expect. But what they are doing, like the U.S. did with the Gulf situation, in the Gulf War, they're softening up Russia first. What they're doing now is trying to take out their artillery.
Right.
Now, Russia will, counter with missiles and drones and things that aren't so easily countered. But nonetheless, you don't simply on day one, go and sweep the place and pick up towns. That's what they did, when they had their first counteroffensive, and everybody expects the second one to be just like that. It's not going to be like that. It took a long time to retake Bakhmut. They're now starting to take towns south of Bakhmut. They're going to probably move to Mariupol. It's going to be slow, and then fast. And people will forget the slow part when they look at it years from now, just as they, sort of forget the slow part of the Gulf War before there was the fast part.
Mm-hmm. Or the slow part between D-Day and victory.
Yeah, for example, it's not fast, it's not straightforward. And if you're doing the proper strategic planning, then part of the tactics is not to take a smaller country and set it up so that you have lots of casualties.
Mm-hmm.
You take your time, and first so as they like to say in their trade, prepare the battlefield.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, 6 Day War is a pretty unique example, I would think, because it's just not applicable to giant armies and invasions of large expanses of land. We're talking about a small area.
Didn't we go to war with places like Panama, in our life?
I see. Yeah, well, there too. That's like, overwhelming force against.
Yeah, it was really quick. Isn't war quick these days? Well, this is sort of a different situation here. You can't have the same expectation.
There's no anti-aircraft installations in Grenada or Panama. That was simply an occupation. How long does it take, two sides with guns to shoot, or to threaten to shoot each other until everyone can see the writing on the wall? But yeah, a high-tech war where there's some technology on both sides, that's going to take some time.
Right.
Okay, that's a good point then. I don't know. I think Americans are pretty. I think we've been dissuaded about the quick war stuff, although you never know. Anytime that a new one comes, cheerleaders will say, this will be over by Christmas. They said it by Iraq, right?
Yeah.
And it took us a quarter of a century to extricate ourselves. If we're extricated. Maybe we're not. I don't know.
They're no better than the pundits any more than the economists are.
Okay. Well, we got a weekend to think about it all, and we'll see you on Monday. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Time for us to turn the page here. I guess we can best summarize what Phillips O'Brien had for us there as war. What is it good for? Well, it's actually complicated. So I mean, maybe it's not as simple as absolutely nothing. And certainly will take a longer time to make that determination than you thought. And it's not that in every case within 6 days you will be able to conclude that the war was good for absolutely nothing. It's a developing story. We'll have to check back on you. So there you go. It's not as catchy a tune. War, what is it good for? It's complicated. Let's talk about it. Subscribe to my Substack, whatever. It doesn't really roll off the tongue in the same way. And, of course, ideologically speaking, you'll want people to take away the message that war is good for absolutely nothing, so then they won't have any. But as it turns out, not always as easy to answer as that. Okay, other stories in the news. I was reminded earlier in our discussion of, a little bit of everything. Hunter Biden, Billy Beer, not so much Rudy Giuliani, but that did remind me of the Giuliani thing. But yeah, okay, so the problem of having relations or not having relations, but having relatives, okay, who are mixed up in no good, up to no good. Billy, whether it's Billy or Hunter or whatever. And then, of course, do you want a distraction for that? Can I throw you something that Republicans will say, that's a distraction from the serious news of either Billy Carter, maybe, which we might still be upset about, or Hunter Biden or whatever. Now, Hunter Biden, of course, not in government, not holding an important role in any sense in governance or anything like it. But maybe you would want to take a look over here at Jared Kushner, who you may recall in ancient times did, in fact, hold a position of some significance in government. Now imagine that Hunter Biden were well, first of all, imagine any of the things that they say about Hunter Biden actually being true. And then imagine that he was actually in government. Imagine that he was in the White House. Imagine that he was the enormously important and influential advisor and peace deal broker at the time that he was taking what amounts to pocket change versus what Jared Kushner was taking for himself. New story from The Intercept today, I think. No, it isn't. What am I talking about? Old story from The Intercept. I knew as soon as I saw it on my doorstep, I should have said, oh, The Intercept? That's, sometimes, I don't know what it is, but people love to circulate old Intercept stories, probably because they were good stories and they got forgotten at the time. And this is just a good time to bring it up. So this is, in fact, an old story that is new to me because maybe it's not even new to me. I already knew it, but I don't know where it's circulated from, but my guess is that it was circulating today precisely because of these accusations against Hunter Biden. Well, look at this terrible thing. And he may have, their allegation is he got $5 million. Why? Because he was the son of a guy who was vice president at the time and something, blah, blah, blah. Well, here's something else that really did happen. And I guess we're already forgetting about it. It was reported in 2018 in The Intercept, and we already forgot, except for the person who circulated it today and said, what about this? Why aren't we talking about this? All right. Is that now I've reset the context of all this instead of saying it was a new story. Jared Kushner's real estate firm sought money directly from Qatar's government in the weeks before that blockade was imposed against Qatar. You remember when the Saudis and the Emiratis teamed up to blockade Qatar? And if you look at a map, you can see how that might happen. Well, this old story, which for some reason made me think it was a new story, maybe because I've never seen it. I don't know if I ever saw this detail reported this way, or if I did, I don't remember seeing it, so it's a good refresher. Jared Kushner's firm made a direct pitch to Qatar's Minister of Finance in April of 2017 in an attempt to secure investment in a critically distressed asset. This was reported again way back when, 2018. Clayton Swisher and Ryan Grimm, back when he was actually doing the reporting at The Intercept. Didn't he get some editorial position there at some point instead? I don't know. I think so. I think he's a bit of a bigger muckety muck these days. But anyway, the long-ish story, the very short version of it is, they're talking about the critically distressed asset in question is that big New York City office building, 666, believe it or not, Fifth Avenue, that Kushner bought way over his head and was leveraged to the hilt on the thing and had huge payments coming in. He needed $1 billion to bail out the property, right? This was now the flagship property of their real estate firm. He needed money. He was a White House advisor and a big muckety muck. And essentially he goes to Qatar and I guess, just as he's learning, thanks to his governmental position, that the Saudis and Emiratis, with whom he's also friends, are about to blockade Qatar, he goes to them, and I guess the implication is, well, I need $1 billion. You have $1 billion. You're about to be blockaded by two people that I have some influence over. Maybe you don't want to be blockaded. Is there something, to borrow the old line from, I love the appearance that Gilbert Gottfried made in, what was it, Beverly Hills Cop 2, where he's trying to bribe him and says, but he's saying, he's got his wallet right with him. Is there something I have in this hand, which if I put it in your hand, would make this whole thing go away? Right? That was the gist of the scene there. So what's going on here? The real estate firm, or what was going on way back when, the real estate firm tied to the family of presidential son-in-law and top White House advisor Jared Kushner made a direct pitch to Qatar's Minister of Finance in April of 2017 in an attempt to secure investment in a critically distressed asset in the company's portfolio, according to two sources. At the previously unreported meeting, but was in fact reported in 2018, Jared Kushner's father, who has no role in anything in the government, Charles, and who is a convicted felon but who later got his, commutation of his sentence and the purging of his conviction from the personal intervention of Jared in the bogus, I would say, pardon frenzy that Trump engaged in at the end of his term. Anyway, at the previously unreported meeting, Kushner's father, Charles, who runs Kushner Companies and sometimes gets convicted of federal crimes, and Qatari Finance Minister Ali Sharif Al-Emadi discussed financing for the Kushner's signature 666 Fifth Avenue property in New York City. The 30-minute meeting, according to the two sources in the financial industry who asked not to be named, included aides to both parties and was held at a suite in the St. Regis Hotel in New York. A follow-up meeting was held the next day in a glass-walled conference room at the Kushner property itself, though Al-Emadi did not attend the second gathering in person. The failure to broker the deal didn't happen. Would be followed only a month later by a Middle Eastern diplomatic row in which Jared Kushner provided critical support to Qatar's neighbors. I didn't get the $1 billion from you. I now give the okay to your neighbors to blockade you. Speaking on behalf of the United States of America, which he doesn't, but which he just went ahead and did anyway, because the other thief in chief said, all right, my daughter gets a piece of that action, I guess, so go ahead. Led by Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, a group of Middle Eastern countries with Kushner's backing led a diplomatic assault that culminated in a blockade of Qatar. Kushner, according to reports at the time, subsequently undermined efforts by Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, you remember that guy, to bring an end to the standoff. Well, I'm the U.S. Secretary of State. I should intervene here and try to settle this thing. Oh, hey, nobody's settling. Why? Oh, as it turns out, it's because one of the guys in the White House who can overrule me is punishing them for not giving him $1 billion. And there's no way I can overcome that because the president won't listen to me because the guy who's pulling this stunt is his son-in-law. That's astonishing. And yet, it's a thing that could be reported in 2018 and you could forget about in the course of the many Trump scandals over the years. This whole thing is a witch hunt. They're prosecuting me because I'm a political opponent and I'm also using the power of the United States government to try to leverage billions of dollars at a time out of foreign governments. And if they don't give it to me, we punish them, i.e., see later Ukraine and your first impeachment. On Friday afternoon, NBC News reported that in late January and early February, Qatari government officials visiting the U.S. considered turning over to Mueller, remember him? What they believe is evidence of efforts by their country's Persian Gulf neighbors in coordination with Kushner to hurt their country. Well, but that's not in Mueller's portfolio. I'm investigating on behalf of the United States, not Qatar. The Gulf crisis involving Qatar and its neighbors will likely be Kushner's defining foreign policy legacy. It turned out not to be the case because most people forgot about it. The crisis followed a May visit to Riyadh, Saudi Arabia by Kushner and the president, what's his name, Donald Trump, who subsequently took credit for Saudi Arabia and its allies' efforts against Qatar. The fallout has reshaped geopolitical alliances in the region, splitting the Gulf Cooperation Council and pushing Qatar, home to the Middle East's largest U.S. military base, closer to Turkey and Iran. Turkey should be okay with us because that's NATO, but it's getting a little weird and flaky. Iran, probably not so much. But was there reason to think that there might eventually be cooperation between Qatar and Iran? Not based on religious differences, but remember that they share/dispute some natural gas claims in the Persian Gulf that lie between them. And it would behoove them to find some way of cooperating a little bit more with Iran, so maybe they would. Mohammed, it's Hitme, I guess it's spelled as hit me, which is like Mohammed kick me. He's why have you taped your name to the back of your shirt, sir? I don't know. Well, Mohammed Hitme I guess. Chief of Staff to the Qatari finance minister did not respond to emails or phone calls seeking comment. Okay. Hey, White House spokesperson at the time, Hope Hicks. Remember her? How does she do it? Well, she does it by referring questions to Kushner companies. Imagine that, right? We have some questions. Why is a top White House aide extorting $1 billion or attempting to extort $1 billion from the Qatari government and not being fulfilled on that request, has instead engineered an international attack on Qatar? Would you please answer that? And her answer was, you'll have to ask the Kushner companies about that. Imagine getting away with that one. All right. She's referred questions to there. How does she do it? That's a good question. How does Hope Hicks get away with that one? She's so responsive to all our questions. Are you kidding me? Well, anyway, they were in fact referred to the Kushner companies, and they went and they asked spokesperson Christine Taylor, and she said, we don't comment on who Charlie meets with. That's Charles Kushner, the pardoned felon. She added, we don't do business with any sovereign funds. Well, you don't now because they refused you. There's no blanket prohibition, I'm sure, at the Kushner companies on doing business with sovereign funds. The Kushner company's meetings with the Qataris were held in the week of April 24th. While Al-Amadi was in New York, he appeared on Bloomberg TV to talk about the strategy of Qatari Investment Authority, or the QIA, the nation's sovereign wealth fund. A host asked Al-Amadi about whether the investment fund did business on the basis of geopolitics. Of course they do. Al-Amadi answered the only way he could. I think if you look at what we do in QIA or in our sovereign wealth fund, it's purely commercially driven, so we go where we think we'll have the best value. We like what we see here. We performed very well in the last 2 years. The market has been very good to us, and hopefully we can continue the same strategy in the U.S. So, garbage, non-answer to anything. This was not, it says, the first time Charles Kushner solicited funds from the Qataris. Remember, he doesn't do business with them. But it is the first direct pitch known to be made to the Minister of Finance himself. Notably, the play came after Trump's election. The Intercept first reported last summer that Charles Kushner had propositioned Sheikh Hamad bin Jassim Al Thani, a prominent businessman who previously served as the country's foreign minister and prime minister. The deal proffered by HBJ, as he is known, was worth $500 million. Not $1 billion, but half of $1 billion, but ultimately fell through when the Kushner companies failed to secure other outside capital. That 2017 effort followed previous entreaties made in the region by Jared Kushner himself. The news of Kushner's company's direct pitch to Qatari government puts a Wednesday report back in 2018 from the Washington Post into broader context. That said, I guess, that U.S. intelligence services had determined that officials in 4 countries, the UAE, China, Israel, and Mexico, had been privately discussing how to use Jared Kushner's real estate investments as a way to gain leverage over him in order to influence official U.S. policy. He's an idiot. We can totally manipulate him. He won't do anything to avoid a conflict of interest. We should be investing in Kushner companies so that we can get his ear, so that we can say, we want you to do something. Kushner has divested from a small portion of Kushner companies, but has retained substantial ownership. A balloon payment due in 2018 on the badly underwater property at 666 Fifth Avenue has been a ticking clock on the fortunes of the Kushner family. I guess they made that payment eventually, precipitating the global hunt for capital. The Washington Post reported earlier this year that the father-son pair, Jared and Charles, speak on a daily basis. The New York Times reported, even earlier than this, way back in 2018, that just prior to Jared Kushner's visit to Israel and Saudi Arabia in May of 2017, his family's real estate company received roughly $30 million in investment from Menorah Mivtachim, described as one of Israel's largest financial institutions. So, anyway, just a reminder of what it really looks like to be a connected family member of a president of the United States, B, occupy an official position in government at the time, and C, still not stop trying to take bribes and make personal gains, and in fact to try to use the power of the federal government that you've got on loan, allegedly from your father-in-law's election, to make personal profits and leverage huge sums of money out of other people. So here we are fretting that, and over something that's not true, but an allegation of $5 million that didn't actually go anywhere and no one ever actually attempted to do it, versus trying to weasel $1 billion out of somebody, not succeeding in doing it, but in bringing U.S. foreign policy to bear as leverage to try to get that money out of somebody. Respect to the Qatari officials who actually stood up to that and said, we'll risk regional war rather than knuckle under $1 billion at a time to this kind of shakedown, because who knows when that will end. I don't know whether that was their purpose in denying it, but you can certainly make that be the story if you want to. All right. Let's see. Other stories that I put away. Here's one from the site formerly known as the Bird site, but now X. Yes, right. That was the report that I shared with Greg earlier, that early this morning, about 8:30 this morning Eastern Time, members of the Jack Smith D.C. federal grand jury had started arriving at the courthouse. So some question as to whether or not that was going to turn into action before the day was out, or perhaps before the show was over. But it doesn't look like only got 40 minutes left to see what, and they may be calling me now. I hear the phone ringing in the background. Hello, we're a grand jury, and we wanted to tell you what we've been up to. Okay, here too, also another of the bits I grabbed from the former Bird site. That was the proof of the story about what DeSantis's people were doing with Congressman Byron Donalds' objection to their incredibly insensitive and tone-deaf and racist claims about the benefits of slavery. Okay, so, by the way, as background on Rudy Giuliani, I'll go back to a story that I shared briefly and then put in the roundup yesterday. I wrote the roundup yesterday, so I stuck it in there. Giuliani concedes he made false statements about Georgia election workers. I don't know if we've really spent time explaining why it was that he makes this admission, but I believe the New York Times piece will explain it. The subheader here is Rudolph W. Giuliani, that's his whole name, said he still had legal defenses in a case brought by two election workers who said he had defamed them, as he asserted that the 2020 election was marred by fraud. This is Alan Feuer writing the piece. And I think the long story short here, though we'll read through it, is he's saying, all right, I will concede that I said these things. I will concede that they turn out to have been false statements, but I don't think you should be allowed to sue me and get compensated for it, because I had a First Amendment right to say those things about you, which may end up being fantasy. But I guess for the purposes of clarifying his claim that the First Amendment is his defense, he, for legal purposes, was willing to say, well, I will stipulate that I said them and that they turned out to be false, so that we don't have to waste time on that one, and we can just go straight to my issue, which is that the First Amendment makes it okay for me to have said those things. It's a strategy, but, I'm sure if you ask him about it, he would say, well, I just, that's why he's clinging to the excuses. Well, I only did it for legal purposes, just so we could get to the First Amendment issue, which I think is really central. We shouldn't waste time over whether or not I said those things, and me have to pay lawyers to do that. It doesn't make any sense. I said them. They're on tape. We should stipulate it and go on. So Rudy Giuliani has conceded that while acting as a lawyer for Trump, he made false statements by asserting that two Georgia election workers had mishandled ballots while counting votes in Atlanta during the 2020 election. The concession came in court papers filed on Tuesday night as part of that defamation lawsuit that the two workers, again, Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss, had brought against him in federal district court in Washington in December of 2021. The suit accused Giuliani and others of promoting a video that purported to show Ms. Freeman and Ms. Moss, who are mother and daughter, of manipulating ballots while working at the State Farm Arena for the Fulton County Board of Elections. In a 2-page declaration, Giuliani acknowledged that he had in fact made the statements that led to the filing of the suit and that the remarks, quote, carry meaning that is defamatory per se, unquote. He also admitted that his statements were actionable and false, and that he no longer disputed the factual elements of liability that the election workers had raised in their suit. Doesn't want to spend any time or money defending that. But Giuliani, insisting that he still had legal defenses in the case, said that he continued to believe his accusations about Freeman and Moss were constitutionally protected under the First Amendment. He also refused to acknowledge that his statements had caused the women any damage, a key element required to collect a judgment in a defamation case. The declaration was filed as Giuliani was confronting potentially painful sanctions for having purportedly failed to live up to his discovery obligations in the case. It appeared to be part of an effort to move past the discovery phase, which had saddled Mr. Giuliani with crippling expenses. Right? So rather than go through all the expensive disclosure related to proving that he said these things and proving that that they were false, or that he knew them to be false, or should have known that they were false, and in order to get himself moved on to the First Amendment issue, which is another way of saying no longer litigating the issues upon which he was A, spending all his money, and B, destined to lose. So he was stonewalling with disclosure, that he could be in trouble with the court for stonewalling disclosure, but instead he stipulates that that the statements were defamatory and false, and he did say them. Then he's out of trouble on discovery because there's no more point in continuing with discovery on that issue. So he saves himself some trouble and some money on that one. In the declaration, he acknowledged making his concessions to avoid unnecessary expenses and litigating what he believes to be unnecessary disputes. Ted Goodman, spokesman for Giuliani, said he had made the concessions to move the case more quickly to a point where a motion to dismiss could be filed. I mean, I don't think he'll win it, but you can file it. Michael J. Gottlieb, a lawyer for Ms. Freeman and Ms. Moss, said that Giuliani's declaration conceded that his clients had, quote, honorably performed their civic duties in the 2020 presidential election in full compliance with the law, and the allegations of election fraud he and former President Trump made against them have been false since day one. But, cat's out of the bag on that one. The corrections, of course, never catch up with the accusations. While certain issues, including damages, remain to be decided by the court, our clients are pleased with this major milestone in their fight for justice, Mr. Gottlieb added, and look forward to presenting what remains of this case at trial. The lawsuit filed by Ms. Freeman and Ms. Moss was among the first to be brought by individual election workers who found themselves dragged into the alternate universe of right-wing politicians and media figures who claimed that Trump had won the election. The two women had originally sued other defendants, including One America News Network and some of its top officials, but ultimately settled the case against everyone except Giuliani. It was one of a series of defamation cases where plaintiffs sought to use the courts to seek accountability against public figures or media outlets that lied about the outcome of the 2020 election and its aftermath. In April, Fox News paid more than $787 million to settle claims by Dominion Voting Systems over the network's promotion of misinformation about the election. Ray Epps, an Arizona man who took part in the Capitol riot on January 6, 2021, sued Fox this month, claiming that its former host, Tucker Carlson, had promoted a fantastical story that Mr. Epps was an undercover government agent who instigated the violence that day as a way to disparage Trump and his supporters. Last year, Ms. Freeman and Ms. Moss appeared as witnesses at a public hearing of the House Select Committee investigating the January 6th events. You know that You remember that whole thing. And told the story of what happened after Giuliani amplified the false claims that they had pulled thousands of fraudulent ballots from a suitcase in their vote counting station and illegally fed them through voting machines. Although Fulton County and Georgia officials immediately debunked the accusations, and we were glad of that, Giuliani kept promoting them, ultimately comparing the women, who both are black, to drug dealers, of course, and calling during a hearing with Georgia state legislators for their homes to be searched. And then, of course, they were not. Yeah, but his home was searched because he was the criminal in all of this. Trump invoked Freeman's name 18 times during a phone call with Brad Raffensperger. You remember that call. In that call, Trump, of course, asked for help to find 11,800 votes. Yeah. Well, okay. I've lost my name and I've lost my reputation, Ms. Freeman testified to the House committee, adding that as her voice rose with emotion. Well, I'll tell you what. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. So, yeah, we got interrupted there by the break, and I'll tell you what, after the break, she concluded with, we're talking here again about Ms. Freeman testifying to the January 6th committee, saying, of course, that she had lost my name, lost my reputation, adding, as her voice rose with emotion, "Do you know how it feels to have the President of the United States target you?" And that, of course, is the problem with loudmouth idiot presidents. He doesn't give a damn what that's like, and he wouldn't understand it even if you tried to explain it to him. But it would be a little bit like sending him to prison for the rest of his life, I think. Maybe we could make him aware. Anyway, 3 weeks ago, a legal ethics committee in Washington said that Giuliani should be disbarred for his unparalleled attempts to help Trump overturn the 2020 election. A few weeks earlier, Giuliani sat for a voluntary interview with prosecutors working for the special counsel, Jack Smith, answering questions about, among other things, a plan to create fake slates of pro-Trump electors in key swing states that Biden had won. And he could face charges in an investigation led by the district attorney in Fulton County into efforts to reverse Trump's 2020 loss in Georgia. So that's it. We've gotten to the end of that piece. Now you know what's going on and what was behind Giuliani's admission that he had, in fact, lied about these women and what they had done, and acknowledged that it was not true. And even though it won't repair her reputation, why it was legally, I guess some people would say, legally in his interest to actually make that stipulation. I mean, it's in order to move on, as we said, to the claim that he has a First Amendment right to lie about what people did and try and reverse an election that had in fact been lost. I don't know that that's going to fit under First Amendment protections. I mean, he has the right to do it, and I don't know. I mean, I'm not even certain what the government has to do with prosecuting him for it. This is a private lawsuit. The government administers the courts that will render judgment, but that's their proper role. What's the First Amendment violation for being called out and sued for making a defamatory comment? I mean, I don't know. I'm not certain what he thinks he's going to do here. But, I guess we always have to worry that you'll draw a crazy judge, but that maybe is part of the reason why they're suing in Washington. I guess most of the defamatory statements may have been made in Washington, so that's good. That'll explain why that's the venue. And I presume more difficult to draw a completely bonkers pro-Trump judge in D.C. Certainly not going to get a jury like that. I don't know if they're going to have a jury trial for it or not, but you could do worse in Georgia, of course, in drawing bad judges. Okay, let's see. Other things to catch up on that we haven't shared in the last couple of days, but which might be of interest to us. Let's see. Well, this is an interesting recap of happenings by Philip Bump at the Washington Post, who very frequently has interesting recaps of things that are happening, things that we have said on the air, so confirms some priors, and we're always happy to have that happen. Trump, it says in the headline, Trump wanted Ukraine to impugn Biden. You remember that. That was the basis of his first impeachment, right? D.C. Republicans finally delivered. This is a good reminder, as I've tried to give you one as the stories roll by, that what they're attempting to, quote unquote, investigate and maybe impeach Joe Biden over is the same stuff. It's the same very same accusations that were so obviously untrue and so obviously outrageous to try to extort from the Ukrainians that we in fact impeached Trump the first time over doing just that. No Republicans in the Senate were unwilling to convict him, even though there was all the evidence in the world. It's that they considered it to be, they just decided they wanted to believe the charges that Trump was making about Biden. And so therefore, I guess they wouldn't want to impeach him. We think you're telling the truth. In fact, we're going to put our own reputations on the line and make the same accusations years later. And that's what's happening. Why did, the subheader asks, Senator Charles E. Grassley of Iowa choose now to release the unverified allegation against Biden that he's possessed all along? There's a lot wrapped up in this question. But yes, this is the FBI form. The small bore issue here has been the FBI form that in which it's alleged, and I guess it's actually in there, that a confidential FBI source reported to the FBI at some point that he had heard from another guy who may or may not be trustworthy, that guy had heard that Burisma had tried to pay off both Hunter Biden and or possibly Joe Biden in order to have Joe Biden use the power of the United States foreign policy and federal government to urge Ukraine to fire the chief prosecutor there, who, of course, as it turns out, was widely considered to be corrupt by much of the world community, and that the United States, in fact, was joining the rest of the world community in calling for this guy's ouster. Joe Biden made a call for his ouster just as the rest of the world did. But the Republican fantasy is that Joe Biden wanted this prosecutor ousted because this prosecutor, despite the fact that he was totally corrupt for many other reasons, was going to let a certain amount of corruption go on if Biden pressured him to do it. So fire the prosecutor so he won't prosecute Burisma, where Hunter Biden works, or worked, depending on the timeline there. And obviously that was, well, they don't want Burisma prosecuted for corruption because that'll rub off on Hunter Biden, and it'll rub off from Hunter onto Joe, because that's the way they fantasize that things will go. And so seeking the dismissal of this prosecutor was supposed to short circuit that tenuous, fantastical chain of events in the minds of Republicans. So apparently, not only did it wasn't just that some Republicans were hypocritically voting not to convict Trump in his first impeachment trial, despite all the evidence, but rather that some of them actually believed that the evidence that Trump claimed to believe that he was trying to dig up from Ukraine was in fact the true evidence. Well, let's just read through Philip's exposition of it here. In early May, because there's another layer to it. In early May, Senator Charles Grassley and House Oversight Committee Chairman James Comer presented a staggering allegation against the sitting president of the United States. The FBI was in possession of a document alleging that Joe Biden had taken a massive bribe while serving as vice president under Barack Obama. But what was really being alleged here was that the FBI was in possession of a document in which a guy says he heard from another guy that guy had heard that of a third guy trying to bribe Hunter Biden and maybe Joe Biden too. And why didn't the FBI immediately execute every Biden in the world? Because obviously, totally corrupt and guilty. And as you know, in this country, you are guilty if a Democrat until murdered by Republicans, I guess, basically. And then even after that, you're guilty still. And the hearing answered that question, and so did the FBI. We didn't think that the guy who told us that he had heard a guy say this thing was enough evidence. And we tried to find other evidence, and then there wasn't any, so it was still, here's a paper where a guy says he heard a guy say that this happened. Did it happen? I don't know. Couldn't find any actual evidence that it did. But a guy did say that he heard another guy say that it had happened. A letter to the two legislators sent to Attorney General Merrick Garland and FBI Director Christopher Wray demanded that the Bureau produce a document recorded on a Bureau Form FD 1023 in mid-2020 that memorialized conversations between a confidential informant and a Ukrainian executive. After all, the letter claimed, the form, quote, describes an alleged criminal scheme involving then Vice President Biden and a foreign national relating to the exchange of money for policy decisions. It does describe it. It just may not be a thing that actually happened. But it describes a scheme that somebody imagined. Since then, nothing much has changed. We learned that the informant is considered credible, given their history, but that, of course, doesn't extend to the executive with whom the informant was speaking. We learned that the executive claimed to be in possession of recordings of conversations with Joe Biden and his son Hunter. We learned that the Justice Department, then under the oversight of Attorney General William Barr, evaluated the allegations, apparently without triggering a full investigation. In other words, in 2020, William Barr became aware of this thing and said, that's all we've got is a confidential informant whom we trust says that an executive whom we don't know and don't trust says that there was a scheme to bribe the Bidens. Can anybody corroborate any of this? No? All right. Well, then we better not do anything with it. We also learned that despite more than a month of focus and the breathless attention of multiple powerful Capitol Hill Republicans, the allegations are no more credible than they were at the point of Grassley and Comer's original letter back in May, right? There have been no recordings made public. There was no Whitey tape. And as it turns out, people are still saying there was no P tape, but I don't know. But, you kind of have to corner. You're kind of painted into a corner. No one has produced this tape. I guess it just doesn't exist, right? There have been no recordings made public. Several Republicans have admitted that they may not exist. We've learned that the executive at issue, Mykola Zlochevsky, founder of the energy firm Burisma, has in the past denied ever speaking with the Bidens. So again, we have a confidential informant says he talked to an executive. The executive says there was a bribery scheme. Mr. Executive, what's the deal with this? No, there was no scheme. I've never spoken with the Bidens. Do we believe him? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. But it doesn't mean anything. The guy who told us that this executive once said this and then changed his mind, we believe that guy. We just don't believe the guy who says, yeah, I bribed them. No, I've never met them. If you got nothing else to go on, I wouldn't do anything with it. Well, anyway, there is no evidence, of course, of an unaccounted for $5 million appearing in the pockets of either Joe or Hunter Biden. After fading to embers, the whole issue was reignited last week when Grassley simply went ahead and published the version of the FD 1023 form that he'd had in his possession all along. I demand that the FBI release it. Well, you already have it. I still demand that the FBI release it. Well, we won't, and you know that. For good reasons, we won't be releasing the thing. It's inflammatory and not conclusive of anything. It doesn't tend to prove anything at all happened. It's garbage as far as we're concerned. And why should we publish it? You have it. You want the FBI to sock puppet this stuff because you know it's garbage and you don't want to be the one to publish garbage. And Grassley's response is, oh yeah? Well, I will publish garbage then. That'll show you. And then he went ahead and did it. And then he used the bird site to tweet, or now X, thanks, that is presumably what he means by THX, thanks to whistleblowers, now the world can see what I've seen and what the FBI tried to conceal, he wrote on Twitter. Serious allegations from trusted FBI source. What did the FBI do to investigate? 4 question marks. And of course he asked that question at the hearings and they said, well, here's what we did to investigate. And we came up with nothing because it was garbage to start with. That was our conclusion. This guy said he heard another guy say that. We asked the other guy. The other guy says, no, I've never said that. I never talked to the Bidens. Oh, maybe he's lying. Let's talk to a bunch of other people. Has he ever talked to the Bidens? Not that I know of. Well, is there like $5 million ever appear in anybody's bank account, Joe or Hunter, like unexplained? No. Well, did he bury it in a coffee can in his backyard? Not that we're aware of. Nothing we've got on it. Well, have you excavated his backyard? You know, we have not. We just don't have enough to even get to a search warrant for that. Sorry. I mean, we tried. And maybe you have something you're really interested in. What have you got? All I have is the form that you have. The one okay. So you've got nothing else? No, but that's your job. Well, we did it and we couldn't find anything. Well, try again. That's essentially the Republican argument here. When it isn't confusing, this is misleading. This is, again, in reference to Grassley's tweet. Thanks to whistleblowers, now you can all see what I've seen it and the FBI tried to conceal. What did the FBI do to investigate this? Well, when it isn't confusing, this is misleading. There's his use of now. That is, right, where he says, now the world can see what I've seen and what the FBI tried to conceal. It makes no sense, given that he clearly had a copy of the 1023 back in May that he could have released at that point. But he was looking for the FBI to release it so that it would look like he had leveraged it out of them for some reason. What's more, the past 80 days have been heavily focused on what the FBI did to investigate, leading the FBI to describe what it undertook to legislators behind closed doors. Grassley also falls into a familiar misleading pattern, conflating the credibility of the informant with the credibility about the allegations, right? He says, serious allegations from trusted FBI source. There were serious allegations relayed by a trusted source that someone else had made to him. Then they spoke to the guy and he said, I never made them and I never spoke to Biden either. And that's all there is to it. I mean, that's as far as they got because they couldn't find anything else. But he's, of course, conflating the trusted source with the not trusted speaker in this case here, right? Grassley falls into the familiar misleading pattern of conflating the credibility of the informant with the credibility of the allegations. As Philip Bump writes, I trust my wife, but if she tells me that our 6-year-old claims to have seen a dragon on the roof, I don't suddenly believe that there was a dragon on the roof. One right-wing blog made a similarly fraught rhetorical leap on Monday, reporting that the FBI had confirmed that the informant had, in fact, traveled to meetings that were documented in the FD 1023. Again, though, nobody's disputing the reliability of the informant. They're just saying, well, he's passing on information from a person who may not be telling the truth. He's passing it on accurately. We trust that. It's just that what's being passed on hasn't been vouched for. The headline, FBI told Delaware U.S. attorney it had already partially corroborated Biden bribery claims, source says. That was the right-wing blog's headline. Again, transfers the credibility of the informant over to the allegations made to the informant. The document published by Grassley includes a specific warning. The confidential human source, or CHS, quote, has only met Zlochevsky in person on one occasion and has spoken to him only twice on the telephone. As such, CHS, the confidential human source, is not able to provide any further opinion as to the veracity of Zlochevsky's aforementioned statements. As journalist Marcy Wheeler notes, validating the timeline of the informant's conversations also means that one conversation occurred in 2019, after there were public, quote, news reports about the investigations into the Bidens and Burisma. It was during this year that Donald Trump and his allies were hoping to elevate the now debunked claims by a fired prosecutor that Joe Biden worked with Hunter Biden to protect Burisma, for which Hunter Biden had served as a board member, to boost Trump's re-election bid. Over the course of 2019, and particularly after the Biden-Burisma link was public, the likelihood that conversations about Joe Biden included deliberate misinformation increased. In other words, by the time this confidential human source has his discussion with, Zlochevsky, there already are widespread news reports of Trump trying to leverage exactly this story out of any Ukrainian willing to tell it. So Zlochevsky tells it. So it's not like, well, independently and out of nowhere and no prompting whatsoever, he had this story to tell about Hunter Biden. What he's doing is mirroring the story that's being circulated by Trump and essentially telling Trump what he wants to hear. I'll tell somebody that I'll confirm Trump's priors, and he will take that and say, see, it's a serious allegation because it's been repeated to a person who will faithfully report that he heard it. But it doesn't work that way. Anyway, over the course of 2019, and particularly after the Biden-Burisma link was public, the likelihood that conversations about Joe Biden included deliberate misinformation increased. If you wanted to give Trump what he wanted, you would agree to pass on that disinformation. By September of that year, Trump's efforts to pressure Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky into making a public announcement about a probe into Biden had become public and triggered an impeachment inquiry. That prompted Trump's attorney, Rudy Giuliani, back in the news again, to head to Ukraine on a fishing expedition that included his meeting with a person later sanctioned by the Trump administration as a Russian agent. Even they were in on their own Russia scheme, huh? In essence, Grassley's release of the FD 1023 serves as precisely the sort of announcement that Trump sought, and at just about the exact same time. An unfounded and dubious claim of wrongdoing landing in July of the year before a presidential election. It's not clear why Grassley decided to make the document public at this point. Again, it's not that he just received it, despite his suggestion in his tweet. It's not enough, or rather, it's not as though there is a new confirmation of the validity of the allegations. It may be an effort to piggyback on questions about the plea agreement that Hunter Biden reached with federal prosecutors and questions about whether he was treated with inappropriate leniency. Or it may be an attempt to spritz the waning embers of the allegation with a last bit of lighter fluid. Representative Claudia Tenney, Republican of New York, appeared on Fox Business on Monday morning, where the host noted that the Oversight Committee's top Democrat, Jamie Raskin, still says there's unverified claims in the document, which is true. Well, the host asks, what are you going to do when you're a defense attorney? You conflate, you defend, you deflect because you know that you have no case, Tenney said of Raskin with unintentional irony. And it's going to come time for the Democrats to actually say, this is worse than Watergate. It is actually not. And the attempt to make it worse than Watergate probably is worse than Watergate. It may still be the case that Joe Biden received a $5 million bribe from Burisma, despite Zlochevsky's saying that he'd never spoken to Biden, and despite there being no documented evidence of any such massive overseas payment. It may still be the case that the sitting vice president in 2015, a guy so eager to be elected president that he started making bids for the Democratic nomination in the 1980s, it may be that he decided to simply cash out on his government experience for a relatively modest sum by committing a federal crime. Sure, I mean, Jared Kushner was seeking to do it, but in exchange for $1 billion, and for a president who would probably pardon him for it anyway. So sure, Joe Biden totally made that decision in 2015. Until the evidence that this occurred extends beyond that same initial Form 1023, though, it seems unlikely that Democrats will consider this to be Watergate adjacent. But at least Republicans got the year before the election Ukraine-related unproven allegations against Biden that he'd been trying to land since 2019. So, yeah, it's exactly the same things that they were trying to leverage in 2019 to use to win the election. They didn't get them. They got their president impeached over it, and they're just simply saying, well, what if a person who wasn't president of the United States and wasn't subject to impeachment made the same allegations? Asks Charles Grassley. And the answer is, of course, you're not subject to impeachment, but you are subject to expulsion, but not without a 2/3 vote of the Senate. So just like Trump, I'll ultimately get away with it and face no punishment. So why don't I just try it? Well, could you come up with a new claim just to add interest? No, I'm very lazy and I'm not going to do that. Okay, well, go ahead. Our people are primed to believe this anyway. All right. And so they went ahead and did it. All right, what else can we do in the last minute or so before things get, before we run out of time? And I don't know. Let's see. Just sort of skimming around. Yeah, I'll have to save that one for Friday. Maybe we will add a little bit of this one here. Just as this is a long read, but we'll throw it in there just as something to ponder on your way out, and you can read the full article if you like. A somewhat different theory on what the hell's wrong with this Donald Trump guy anyway. The big why, we are asked in Salon magazine by Lucian K. Truscott IV, as a matter of fact. Wow, that's some name. Biggest thing since Thurston Howell. The big why. What's behind Donald Trump's apparent self-sabotage? His escalating threats of violence and spiraling out of control leave more questions than it answers. And I think, at bottom, I think the simple answer is are we sure it's self-sabotage? Because his supporters seem to support him more fervently than ever. But I guess it's self-sabotage because there are fewer and fewer of those supporters. That's the reality of it. But, if you live in a bubble, you won't see it that way. So let's see. Here's a guy. He starts off. He's in his late 20s, maybe early 30s. He owns a big hotel in Midtown Manhattan. He's a millionaire many times over. He's in the papers so much that he's famous just for being who he is. He can have anything he wants in life. He can have any woman he wants. He doesn't even have to wait for them to say yes, apparently. If you ask E. Jean Carroll and probably dozens of others, in fact, we know dozens of others. We know the names of those dozens of others. Anyway, he's on a cross-country flight from L.A. to New York, seated in first class next to an attractive woman. So what does he do after they have first-class dinner service seated side by side? He leans over, and without even asking or saying a word, He starts kissing her on the mouth and groping her breasts. Hey, good morning, breakfast listeners. When he takes his hand and starts reaching up her skirt, the woman picks up her purse and flees through the drawn curtains into the coach cabin. When, several years later, he meets the same woman at a big charity event in Manhattan, what does he do? Does he turn away and try to avoid her for the rest of the evening? Does he leave the event? No. He strides right up to her, and with people all around them in their evening finery, he calls her, and I don't want to make this be the last word of today's thing, but he calls her, well, we'll just go with the C word on that one. Just boom, does it. Well, he was Donald Trump, this guy, of course, in case you haven't imagined it. It was the late 1970s. He had a wife and children. He owned a real estate all over New York, and he owned the Miss Universe pageant, where dozens of beautiful young women competed for his attention. If he wanted to be unfaithful to his wife, he could simply pick up the phone and have, it was said, any woman he wanted. With all his money, all his fame, all the attention he got on a daily basis for doing ordinary things like having dinner at a restaurant, or appearing at a nightclub, or even walking down the street. Why did a man who didn't know the woman sitting next to him on a commercial airplane in full view of the other passengers and flight attendants do what he did? As he would later say, grab her by, well, you know where. Describing the exact same act when speaking to a reporter from a major television program years later. Well, I don't know. Well, anyway, Lucian has some theories about it, about why he is involved in this kind of self-sabotage. Or, my guess is, I don't know that he even sees it as self-sabotage. It's just he, I guess, needs to reaffirm his belief that he's so powerful and attractive and fantastic that he literally can get away with it. If you're a star, they let you get away with it. Anyway, maybe we'll look back. I'll read through it. I just wanted to give you a hint, something to read as we exit for today. I don't know how much this adds to the conversation, but it might be something you want to pick up over the weekend and see whether there's a valid theory there. In the meantime, I know there's some valid theories going to be offered on the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, which comes up next right here on Netroots Radio, as Justice Putnam takes you through his collection of stories, including, let's see, what's up top here? MAGA lies and physical intimidation have driven election workers from their jobs in every state of the union. But Trump's big lie has hit a brick wall in court.
To Kagro in the morning with David Waldman.
Well, that's the theme of the year. Yes, so great. We'll have more explanation of that then on the rest of the menu. 22 attorneys general opposed the 3M company settlement over public water systems contaminated with forever chemicals. Boy, it's been a while since we had that topic discussed. Stay tuned for that and much more.